You will be shocked by the rules women had to follow in the Victorian era. For women, this era became a golden cage, where every step, every breath, and every word was subject to a set of unwritten but ironclad rules. These rules dictated how they should dress, what they should think, and what they should feel, turning their lives into an endless performance. Society created an ideal image of a woman, a meek, submissive, and completely powerless angel in the home. Behind the beautiful pictures lay a system of total control that suppressed any attempt by women to be themselves. It was an era when the female mind was considered a threat, and the female body an object to be tightly laced and hidden from prying eyes. Watch the video to the end to find out how a simple desire to eat lunch alone in a restaurant could permanently ruin the reputation of a Victorian lady. What I am about to describe would be forbidden in modern society, but it was a mandatory ritual for millions of women. The death of a loved one turned the life of a Victorian woman into a strictly regulated performance, where the main thing was not consolation, but impeccable observance of the rules. Mourning was not just a state of mind, but a complex social obligation with its own dress code and etiquette. The strictest mourning was observed for a husband and could last up to 2.5 years, effectively removing a woman from public life. The first year, known as deep mourning, required complete seclusion and the wearing of special clothing. A woman had to literally disappear from the world, demonstrating her grief. Clothes for deep mourning were made of matte black crepe, a stiff, dull fabric symbolizing a life extinguished. Dresses were completely covered, and the face was hidden by a thick black veil that was difficult to breathe through. Any hint of decoration or shiny detail was considered the height of impropriety. After a year, a period of second mourning began when some relaxation of the dress code was allowed. Fabrics with a slight sheen, such as silk or satin, could be used, but the color remained strictly black. The veil became shorter, but it was still highly undesirable to go out in public. These rules applied not only to clothing, but to the entire lifestyle. Widows were forbidden from attending balls, theaters, and any entertainment events. Their social life was reduced to visits to church and rare meetings with their closest relatives. Even letter paper had to have a black border, the width of which decreased as the mourning period ended. This was a way to inform the correspondent of her status without saying a word. A woman's entire life became a visual declaration of her grief. These rituals were so complex that there were entire magazines devoted to mourning fashion and etiquette. They provided detailed instructions on what to wear and when, so as not to violate propriety. A mistake in the choice of fabric or the length of the veil could be perceived as disrespectful to the memory of the deceased. For women without financial support, the death of a husband meant not only personal tragedy, but also social death. Locked in mourning clothes, they lost any chance of finding work or remarrying. Society demanded that they mourn without caring about how they would support themselves. In essence, the complex mourning etiquette was another way to isolate women and control their behavior. It deprived them of their free will, forcing them to play a prescribed role in a drama written by men. It was a theater where sincere feelings were replaced by strict adherence to form. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about this approach to grief? Was it a way to support the bereaved or a tool of social pressure? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about what the ideal Victorian woman was supposed to be like? Her purpose was described in one phrase, angel in the house. This ideal, celebrated by poets and writers, was in fact a demand for complete self-denial and submission. Women were seen not as individuals, but as the moral compass of the family, its spiritual center. Their task was to create an atmosphere of peace and comfort at home, protecting their husbands from the hardships of the cruel outside world. They had to be pure, meek, gentle, and completely passive. Intelligence and ambition were considered masculine qualities, completely inappropriate for a woman. Her education was aimed not at developing her mind, but at acquiring skills useful for marriage. She studied music, drawing, and languages to entertain her husband and guests, not to have her own opinion. Any display of strong emotions, passion, or disagreement was considered a sign of poor upbringing and even mental instability. An angel had to be always calm, smiling, and ready to serve. Her own desires and needs were of no importance. Her whole life revolved around the home and family. Managing servants, raising children, and maintaining domestic order were her only acceptable occupations. The world of politics, business, and science was completely closed to her. This ideal was imposed from childhood through books, sermons, and public opinion. Girls were taught to be quiet, obedient, and always put the interests of others above their own. They were prepared for the role of wife and mother as their only possible calling. A woman had to be the embodiment of selflessness. She existed to serve her husband, support him, and never burden him with her problems. Her happiness depended entirely on the happiness of her family. This image was convenient for society, as it completely excluded women from the struggle for power and resources. She was reduced to a function, to a beautiful decoration of the home. Her personality was erased under the mask of angelic meekness. In practice, this ideal often led to internal tragedies. Women, forced to suppress their talents and aspirations, suffered from depression and feelings of unfulfillment. But even these sufferings were attributed by society to female weakness and nervous disorders. Ultimately, the angel in the house was not so much an ideal as a sentence. It was a sentence to a life deprived of freedom of choice, intellectual development, and personal growth. Women were icons to be admired, but no one took them seriously. Do you think there are echoes of this ideal of the guardian angel of the hearth in modern society? But what if I told you that this image of an angel was confined to a real cage that deformed the body and made it difficult to breathe? In the next chapter, we will reveal the shocking truth about Victorian fashion. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of Victorian ladies, their secret language of communication, which was understood without a single word. Deprived of the opportunity to openly express their thoughts and feelings, women invented a complex and elegant system of nonverbal signals. Ordinary objects, a fan, gloves, a handkerchief, or a bouquet of flowers, became tools of secret communication. A fan was not just an accessory for cooling oneself, but a real means of flirting and social intrigue. Each gesture had its own meaning. For example, a fully open fan covering the lower part of the face meant, "Follow me." If a lady fanned herself quickly, it was a signal that meant, "I love you." If on the contrary she fanned herself slowly, it meant, "I am married." Closing the fan sharply meant showing anger or dissatisfaction. Touching the right eye with a closed fan was a silent question. "When can I see you?" Tapping the left hand meant, "Don't flirt with others." This complex system allowed a whole dialogue to be conducted right in the middle of a noisy ballroom, unnoticed. Equally important was the language of flowers, or floriography. Each flower and even its shade had its own meaning. A bouquet could be a love message, a confession, or a rejection. A red rose, as it does today, symbolized passionate love. A yellow rose, on the other hand, was a sign of jealousy or fading feelings. Receiving a bouquet of geraniums meant that the gentleman considered you frivolous. Composing and deciphering such bouquets was an art form that girls were taught from a young age. There were special dictionaries that helped to understand all the subtleties of this floral language. It was a safe way to talk about feelings in a society where such conversations were forbidden. Gloves were also part of this secret code. Dropping one glove was a veiled invitation to get acquainted. Taking off and putting on gloves during a conversation meant nervousness or a desire to end the conversation as soon as possible. Even a handkerchief could convey messages. Folded into a triangle, it meant that a lady's heart was taken. And if she fiddled with a handkerchief crumpled into a ball, it was a sign of dislike for the person she was talking to. This system of secret signs was the product of the strictest restrictions. It gave women the illusion of freedom and control over the situation. It was their little rebellion, a way to get around the rules without formally breaking them. What if everything you were taught about progress in the 19th century was only half true? While men were making scientific discoveries and building empires, education for women remained at the level of preparation for a single career: marriage. The goal of education was not to impart knowledge, but to make girls more attractive commodities on the marriage market. Serious sciences, such as mathematics, physics, or philosophy, were considered harmful to the female mind. It was widely believed that excessive mental strain could undermine fragile female health. Therefore, the emphasis was placed on so-called accomplishments, achievements, or skills. The curriculum for girls from good families included a superficial study of French or German. They were also taught to play the piano, sing, paint with watercolors, and embroider. All this was intended to enable her to entertain her husband and guests in the future. Reading was allowed, but the range of literature was strictly limited. Girls were allowed to read novels with decent plots, poetry, and religious texts. Books that might make her think about social problems or her position were banned. The main goal of such an education was to instill obedience, modesty, and the ability to behave in society. Girls were taught how to bow correctly, engage in small talk on trivial topics, and manage a household. Their minds were to remain passive and uncritical. Thus, the education system did not develop but suppressed the girl's personality. It turned her into a beautiful, well-mannered doll, devoid of her own opinion. It was preparation for life in a golden cage. Why do you think society was so afraid of educated women? Education was forbidden. But even if a woman received it, she could not dispose of her knowledge or money. In the next chapter, you will learn how marriage turned women into property. Upon marriage, a Victorian woman ceased to exist as an independent legal entity. This legal phenomenon was called coverture, or the doctrine of husband's guardianship. According to this law, after marriage, the wife's personality was completely absorbed by her husband's. In practice, this meant that women lost virtually all their civil rights. They could not own property in their own name. Everything that belonged to them before marriage, land, money, jewelry, automatically became the property of their husbands. Even the money she earned through her own labor belonged to her spouse by law. He had the full right to dispose of her salary at his discretion. A woman could not open a bank account without his permission. She also lost the right to enter into contracts and conduct business on her own behalf. Any agreement signed by a married woman had no legal force. She could not file a lawsuit or be a defendant in court. All lawsuits were filed on behalf of her husband. Even the right to her own body was conditional. The husband had the legal right to physical control over his wife. The concept of domestic violence as we understand it today simply did not exist. This law turned women from citizens into eternal children under guardianship. At first, her guardian was her father, and then this role passed to her husband. She never had a period when she could make her own decisions. It was only in the second half of the 19th century that the first Married Women's Property Acts were passed. These laws gradually gave women the right to own property and dispose of their income. But it was a long and persistent struggle that lasted for decades. The doctrine of coverture was the basis of the patriarchal system. It legally enshrined the subordinate position of women in the family and society. It was the legal basis on which all other restrictions were built. A woman was not a partner in marriage, but part of her husband's property, on a par with the house, furniture, and livestock. Her main value lay in her ability to bear heirs, who were also considered the property of their father. It was legalized slavery, hidden behind the facade of the sacred bonds of marriage. This system deprived women of any protection in the event of an unhappy marriage. If her husband was a spendthrift, he could squander her entire fortune, and she could do nothing about it. If he was cruel, leaving him meant being left without a means of support and without children. This is what happened behind the closed doors of Victorian mansions when marriage turned into a prison. For Victorian women, marriage was a one-way street from which it was impossible to turn back. Divorce was such a complicated, expensive, and scandalous process that it was simply unavailable to the vast majority. The law was written by men and for men, which created glaring inequality. A husband could file for divorce on the sole basis of his wife's infidelity. This was considered sufficient grounds as it called into question the legitimacy of his heirs. For a woman, however, simply proving her husband's infidelity was not enough. She had to prove that her spouse had not only cheated on her, but had also committed other serious offenses. For example, abuse, incest, or bigamy. It was almost impossible to gather evidence. A woman locked within four walls had neither the means nor the opportunity to conduct an investigation. Society always sided with the husband and condemned the wife who dared to air her dirty laundry in public. Even if a woman miraculously managed to get a divorce, it was the beginning of her social ruin. A divorced woman became an outcast. She was no longer accepted in decent society, and her friends and even relatives turned away from her. She lost everything: her home, financial support, and worst of all, her children. By law, children were considered the property of their father, and the court almost always left them with him. Mothers were allowed only rare and strictly controlled visits. Without education or property rights, a divorced woman found herself on the street with no means of support. The only option for many was work that was considered humiliating or complete impoverishment. Society offered her no support. Therefore, most women were forced to endure any humiliation in marriage. They lived with unfaithful, cruel, or alcoholic husbands because the alternative was even worse. Marriage became a life sentence. This system was designed to maintain the stability of the family institution at any cost. The happiness and well-being of individual women were not taken into account. They were merely cogs in a large social machine. Only at the end of the era did the situation begin to change slowly. But even then, divorce remained a privilege of the very rich and brave. For the average woman, the words of the wedding vow, "Until death do us part," were a harsh reality. Why was society so adamant about the indissolubility of marriage for women? Even if a woman remained married, her career opportunities were virtually nil. In the next chapter, we will talk about decent and indecent professions. For a Victorian woman of the middle or upper class, work was not an opportunity for self-fulfillment, but a sign of misfortune. A working woman meant one of two things. Either her father or husband was unable to provide for her, or she was fallen. Both were stigmas of shame. A woman's sole purpose was to marry well, after which she was expected to devote herself entirely to her home and family. Any thought of a career was considered strange and indecent. It was a direct challenge to social norms and her feminine destiny. However, life often made its own adjustments. If a woman did not marry and remained a spinster, or if she was a widow without means, she had to look for work. But the list of decent professions was depressingly short. The most common option was to work as a governess. It was an unenviable position. A woman lived in someone else's house, occupying an ambiguous position between a servant and a member of the family. She received a meager salary, worked from morning to night, and often suffered humiliation. Another option was to be a companion to an elderly, wealthy lady. This job also required no education and consisted of reading aloud, helping with correspondence, and alleviating loneliness. In essence, it was the same dependent position, but without teaching responsibilities. Women from the lower classes had more choices, but the working conditions were appalling. They worked in factories, mines, or as domestic servants for 12-14 hours a day. Their work was hard, dangerous, and paid half as much as men's. Writing was one of the few loopholes that allowed women to realize their intellectual potential and earn money. However, there were many obstacles here as well. Many women writers were forced to take male pseudonyms so that their works would be taken seriously. The names of George Sand, George Eliot, and the Bell brothers, the pseudonym of the Bronte sisters, are striking examples of this. Publishers and critics were convinced that women were incapable of writing anything serious. A male name on the cover was a ticket to the world of great literature. Society created a paradoxical situation. It deprived women of education and rights, and then condemned them if, finding themselves in trouble, they tried to earn a living. Working women were a living reproach to the patriarchal system. Thus, professional self-fulfillment was practically an unattainable dream for Victorian women. They were locked into their social roles. Any attempt to break out of these boundaries was punished by public contempt. Nothing symbolizes the oppressed position of Victorian women like the corset. This item of clothing was not just a fashion accessory, but a real instrument of control that shaped not only the silhouette, but also behavior. It was the physical embodiment of the social restrictions imposed on women. Girls were started in corsets from an early age. This was done in order to shape the ideal figure, an unnaturally thin waist, ample breasts, and hips. The ideal waist was considered to be no more than 40-45 centimeters in circumference. To achieve this result, corsets were tightened with incredible force. They compressed the internal organs, displacing them from their natural position. This led to numerous health problems, which, however, were not talked about. The corset made it hard to breathe normally, allowing only shallow, superficial breaths. That's why Victorian ladies fainted so often. Any excitement or physical effort could lead to a lack of oxygen. This garment severely restricted mobility. In a tightly laced corset, it was difficult to bend over, walk quickly, or lift anything heavy. It turned a woman into a fragile, graceful, but completely helpless creature. This was precisely the image cultivated by society. A real lady had to be weak, delicate, and dependent on men. The corset physically imposed this role on her, making her incapable of active activity. The corset was not just a piece of clothing, but a metaphor for a woman's entire life. Just as it constricted her body, preventing her from breathing deeply, so society constricted her life with rules and prohibitions. It was an outer shell that reflected inner slavery. The most insidious rule that Victorian women had to obey was the cult of innocence, taken to the point of absurdity. The ideal woman had to be not only pure, but also completely ignorant. Any knowledge about her own body, politics, or the problems of the real world was considered unnecessary and even harmful for her. Girls were raised in complete isolation from the realities of life. Mothers did not talk to their daughters about physiology or marital relations. Many girls got married without having the slightest idea of what awaited them on their wedding night. This artificial infantilization was convenient for men. An ignorant woman who did not know her rights and capabilities was easy to control. Her horizons were deliberately narrowed to the size of the living room and the nursery. Curiosity and the pursuit of knowledge were not encouraged in women. If she asked inappropriate questions or showed interest in male topics, it was considered bad form. Her mind had to remain unclouded, like that of a child. This cult of ignorance meant that women were completely unprepared for life's difficulties. When faced with financial problems, a husband's infidelity, or illness, they did not know how to react. They were taught to be helpless. The suppression of intellectual and emotional needs often led to internal breakdowns. However, society and medicine at the time found a convenient explanation for any manifestation of female discontent. This explanation was the universal diagnosis of hysteria. Any woman who did not fit into the narrow framework of Victorian propriety could be declared hysterical. Too emotional, too intelligent, too independent, suffering from depression, or simply unhappy in marriage. All these were symptoms of hysteria. This diagnosis was a convenient label that devalued any complaints made by women. The treatment matched the diagnosis. Hysterical women were prescribed bed rest, forbidden any mental activity, and forced to lead as passive a lifestyle as possible. In essence, the treatment consisted of further suppressing the woman's personality. Thus, women were denied not only their rights, but also the right to their own feelings and thoughts. Their inner world was declared irrational and sick. Any attempt at protest or self-expression was interpreted as a symptom of an illness that needed to be treated. This was the final act of suppression. Women were convinced that their suffering was not the result of an unjust system, but their own fault, their personal pathology. It was the most effective way to silence them. We have lifted the veil on the world of Victorian women and seen that behind the glittering facade lay a reality full of prohibitions, restrictions, and oppression. The rules of mourning, the ideal of the angel in the house, the tyranny of the corset, and the cult of ignorance were all part of one big system designed to control half the population. It was an era when women were put on a pedestal, only to be denied the right to come down to earth and live a full life. The history of these women is not just a collection of shocking facts from the past. It is a reminder of how long and difficult the road to equality has been. By studying these rules, we begin to better understand the value of the freedoms that we take for granted today. Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. Perhaps you are interested in a different era or a specific historical event. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes in which we will continue to explore the most interesting and controversial pages of history.